Hi, I'm Dave Coleman with Aerohive Technical Marketing, and this is Gregor with Aerohive Technical Marketing.
And today we're going to discuss something a little bit less technical, kind of, sort of, which is how do you get into being a technical person? How to be a techie? How to get to be an SE, a support person, an engineer? And a nice segue is actually, I like your story, how you ended up in Wi-Fi. Let's do a quick recap.
I got fired. I actually was sort of a network engineer for a circuit board manufacturing company, and I got laid off. And I needed to find work, and I went to a computer technical convention in Atlanta, Georgia, and a lot of the vendors there were introducing their very first wireless networking products. This is pre-Wi-Fi, and so I became interested in the technology, and I self-educated myself about the technology, and that's kind of how my career in Wi-Fi got started.
And we'll talk about the technicalities, how you get there. My background story is I started in sales. But I was interested in the things that I was selling, and I was always a thinker, and kind of grew from being a sales into being a more technical person.
Right. I think a lot of people in the computer industry started out as hobbyists. I mean, that's how I got into computing in general. I started playing with computers at my home. I thought they were fun, and as a hobby, I ran bulletin boards, and I had as many as back in the 90s, had as early 90s, late 80s, had as many as 8 or 9 phone lines coming into my house, and that cost a fortune back then, back in 1200 baud modems. But it was a hobby, and that eventually became a career. So,
okay, so let's go into the technical part of this discussion. How does a person start? Where do we go in terms of I want to self-educate or I want to become an expert? Let's say in the field of Wi-Fi.
Okay, I mean, I think we need to talk about this in 2 different ways. We need to talk about this in networking in general. We also need, and we can expand upon that in terms of Wi-Fi. So I'm going to flip it around first. Let's talk more about networking in general.
Sure.
If you want to have a career in the IT industry and networking, you need to learn the OSI model. Which is the layers, theoretical layers.
So you're starting with the theory, understanding how things are supposed to work.
Right.
Okay.
And quite honestly, you can start on Wikipedia. I mean, you can read about the OSI model. And then if you want to learn more about theory and networking theory and components and how everything hooks up together, there are several different ways you can go. You can go to a certification track.
Okay.
In the industry, it's generally understood, even though it's not vendor neutral, the Cisco CCNA certification is typically considered kind of an entry-level certification.
Well, for a technical person, there's actually a couple of prequels to this, because you have the CompTIA's support and engineering and
like networking plus and A+.
Which is, to be honest, valuable, but not really technical.
No.
So you may want to see, depending on how you're comfortable with, this would be easing yourself in, or if you just jump into the CCNA type of training where you get the hands-on, it's a little bit more of a steep learning curve.
Right.
But a lot of us have done it this way.
Right, and I mean, we'll come back, we'll circle back to the hands-on because that's extremely important. I think we're just kind of talking about getting an education knowledge base first. Sure. I've always recommended CCNA. I mean, that's kind of how I kind of got started on the networking side of things. And if you just want to, there's also a good book I always recommend too. It's a O'Reilly Press book. It's called Network Warrior. That I always tell people to go out and get their hands on either a hard copy or a ebook version that talks about all the different components of IT components, and anywhere from switches to wireless components to routers and firewalls.
Major features implemented, like spanning tree.
And spanning tree and the protocols, and learning the protocols. And I mean, it's pretty technical. Yeah. But it's a really good book to me. It was a good book to me that I like to point people to because it ties a lot of things together.
You have a great point because it opens, it has several chapters. And all of the chapters start from what was the problem, what's the technical solution, like theoretical solution to solving the problem.
There's some historical points to it too.
The historical points, so people understand the why, and then it adds up with the specific, okay, this is how you configure with Cisco, this is how you would configure with Junos and other types, because there are several versions of that book, but it helps you understand. It's a great way to learn.
Right. So in networking in general, those are some good starting places. Let's talk about Wi-Fi. And if you want a career in Wi-Fi, once again, I think a lot of people know about this, and a lot of people don't. The CWNP program, cwnp.com, and you'll see it up here on the screen too.
Right.
It's a vendor-neutral certification board for anything and everything about 802.11 Wi-Fi technology. Their foundation certification is something called Certified Wireless Network Administrator. Shameless plug here. I'm the co-author of the study guide for that on Cybex Publishing. It is typically considered, not to sound too egotistical, but it's considered kind of the Bible of the Wi-Fi industry in a lot of ways. It'll help you pass an exam, but it's also used for a lot of people in the industry as a technical reference guide. Other places you can go to self-educate, blogs. I always point everybody to Lee Badman's blog, Wired Not. Really good blog about wireless networking.
And I really like it because it's a mix of personal experience with the technology, not just focus on in the technology itself. It has that personal vantage point. This is what it's important to me in my environment, and this is how I perceive. So
right, cool thing about blogs is there's a lot of real world aspects to them. Glenn Cate has his own blog as well. I will show that up here on the screen as well, and he also has a really good blog roll. So there's literally hundreds of blogs just on wireless networking, and that's a great place to start. I try to follow. There's at least 6 or 7 that I follow and try to read on a regular basis. People
also have podcasts.
There's podcasts. There's for networking in general. There's Packet Pushers,
which is the biggest one.
That's the biggest one in the industry.
Different podcasts.
Yeah, they have and a whole slew of networking topics. I actually was lucky enough to just work with them, and where I was recording one on about 802.11ax technology. But they interview people in the industry, and they have weekly shows, and that's a great place to go, packetpushers.net.
Right. And for the Wi-Fi, you have Wireless LAN Professional.
It's a community.
It's a community, but it's kind of started, I think, as a podcast.
It started as a podcast.
And it had about 60 or whatever episodes.
And I think they're still doing the podcasting.
And then it kind of died, but now it's getting
They're
back.
doing podcasting, and they're also doing videos, and it's all free and it's freely accessible. And there's also the WLAN Pros community and WLAN professionals. They hold conventions too, which if you're going to be in this industry, I highly recommend you attend.
Right.
There's one in the United States every year. There's a couple in Europe every year, and now they're branching out into APAC, Asia, and Latin America.
Right.
So no matter where you are in the world, you can
either physically go and participate, which is a great experience because you're interacting with your peers, or everything is recorded.
Or everything's recorded. So if you can't attend, like my boss wouldn't pay for me to go to the last one in Phoenix. It's because he got to go. So however, I was able to watch the videos the week following, which are of all the speakers, and so it's really a great resource. And then they're always there and available. You can go back and watch past years as well.
So to quickly recap, we have a mix of organized curriculum-based certification that you can go in and start learning about Wi-Fi or networking in general. Then we have blogs, and then we have industry events and everything in between. But it is a lot of self-learn. So one thing that I would caution is, not caution, it's a good thing. There's a lot of information out there. Absorb as much as possible. Be critical as much as possible.
Right.
And critical means you can start being critical about it once you get more knowledge and understanding, and also hands-on.
Right. So
Let's do hands-on.
let's talk about hands-on, but then I want to circle back to the self-training aspects of this. Theory and knowledge is great, but you have to, if you're going to be in this industry, you're going to have to need hands-on as well. So when I was started self-training, I got a hold of equipment. Whether I was able to borrow some, buy it for cheap on eBay. If we just talk about the wireless side of things, get a hold of some access points.
So we have an access point here. There's a couple of here. We work for an enterprise vendor. For somebody learning this on their own dime, it can be intimidating looking at the price. Oh my God!
And
so
then and not just the pricing, but also the licensing might be an issue.
Licensing and everything. So building up your own lab,
Right.
It's pretty intimidating. It can be a couple of grands easy. But does it have to be a couple of grands?
No, it doesn't. I mean, you can, believe it or not, some of the open source stuff that is available on some of the Soho type equipment is pretty full featured.
I started my hands-on experience on the cheapest of the equipment. Well, not cheapest. I have to correct myself here. On the affordable equipment, because you have vendors like there's a very popular vendor in East Europe, and it's a worldwide vendor called Microtech, which is essentially a Linux on top of different hardware. So they are doing routing, switching, Wi-Fi, and you can learn a lot about what it is, what it does, how you do it, and the boards can be affordable. They're starting like $50 and going up there. So buying and getting your hands-on equipment works.
Well,
and there's also a secondary market.
There's a secondary market like eBay, and there's another thing I can't believe I didn't think about until just now, virtualization too.
And there's a virtualization.
So now there's ways to virtualize a lot of networking components.
A lot of people will know GNS, GNS3 being the latest one where you can emulate and just run all kinds of different devices. You can actually run real Cisco devices, Junos devices, others. You still have to have a license for it. But you also have the open source types like pfSense, which does a lot of routing. You have QEMU, which does routing and switching. And so you can learn about with little to no money,
right,
and just build up yourself too.
Well, we could go on all day about this. I mean, I highly recommend anybody for both wired and wireless networking to learn frame and packet analysis. One of the best things I did for my career was to learn the 802.11 frame format and how all the frames work with each other and all their interactions. And same can be said about Ethernet as well. And up into higher layers when you get into IP packet analysis. Look, you don't. There are some very expensive protocol analyzers out there that are great, full of features, but there's something called Wireshark, and it's free.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's pretty powerful.
And it's pretty powerful. You know, may not be quite as pretty as some of the other ones, but look, I believe I use Wireshark more almost all the time now.
Yeah,
and it's free.
And we're blessed. We do have access to expensive and really expensive equipment. But you don't necessarily need it to learn or to perform your job, right? So you can do it. So you build up, you get your hands on, you configure stuff, you see, you learn the theory, you try implementing in the real world, and then it kind of you just go into this process of understanding more and more and more.
So I'm going to circle back to the training aspects of it too, because as Gregor mentioned, it can be kind of an overload, and you kind of need to focus. So a couple of things I advise is see if there's any way possible, see if you can find a mentor, okay, or just talk to somebody that's in the field and just ask them for some advice. So kind of like we're giving you right now, you know.
I do not know anybody. I'm new. I just like Wi-Fi. How do I find people?
People are going to laugh at me when I say that. So you can go on Twitter.
So you have community.
There's a big wireless LAN community on Twitter. Yeah. You can follow me at Mr. Multipath. What's your Twitter address?
It's my name and surname, so it's going to be somewhere here.
Up here on the screen. And once you start following the two of us, you'll see lots of other people and communicate. That's another way to learn, and you can reach out to people, believe it or not, and we'll point you in directions. If you actually take training classes, that you're actually going to spend. I mean, once again, I'm mostly self-taught, but I'm also a trainer, so I teach classes, and a lot of times people pay for training.
Right.
My advice is, if you ever pay for training, always ask for the resume of the trainer.
Yeah.
Because some of these training companies that are out there are only interested in your money, and they're not interested in advancing your career or your brain. So you got to be careful. Sometimes the trainer that's teaching you Cisco routing has never touched a router before. So get the resume. That's very important.
Right.
We've mainly focused, Gregor, on networking, but that's just one aspect of the IT industry. You had mentioned to me you wanted to talk about another part of...
Well, here's the thing. The technology is fascinating, and it's growing, and it's adapting, and it's shifting priorities and everything. And most likely, whatever you learn today, you may or may not use a decade later. So if you like Wi-Fi, the normal thing is you have to know how it's all connected. So on one side, you have to understand the RF, which is very different to the other side, which is just the networking, the IP. So you have to understand switching, you have to understand routing, you have to understand the protocols, anything from DNS, DHCP, radius, because it all crosses. You have client on one side and services on the other, and the Wi-Fi is in between, so you have to understand it. Maybe not to the point that you can configure an ISP type routing, but you have to understand where it fits, how it influences.
Right. So at the end of the day, wireless access point is a wireless portal into a pre-existing network infrastructure, and you're integrating it. So you have to have an understanding of those other components that Gregor just mentioned.
And there's also one thing that it's sometimes unfair, but that's life. People don't understand Wi-Fi. People have a misconception about Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is the thing that they're connecting it first, and it's often getting the blame for something that if something doesn't work. And they will point the finger at you, and you'll have to figure it out and show them no.
And blame the firewall.
Blame the firewall. It's the DHC problem.
It's always the firewall.
Internet pipe. It can be firewall or many other things that's not necessarily has to do anything directly with Wi-Fi, but you'll have to understand it because it will impact the users on your Wi-Fi.
So we've been talking about networking, and we've been talking about Wi-Fi. Well, what about programming or coding or learning?
This is where the industry is going, and there's a little bit of like an abstract. People don't understand programming. Maybe being in the industry for a while, where programming was like a hardcore discipline. It's a very abstract language. You start from like assembly type, talking directly to the hardware, or something a little bit more on top of it, like C#, C++, and you have this concept of libraries, memories, loops, and it's sometimes a little bit too much.
Overwhelming.
Overwhelming. But where the industry goes, for the extensibility, for just making the product and solution grow and fit to the usage, there's concepts of the cloud networking, APIs, programmability, software defined, and all of these concepts that they are important, and you should be aware of them. And on the other side, the programming language and everything is also adapting for more rapid development. If you think about
building blocks.
Building blocks. So if you think about programmability of the networking, it's not like writing millions of codes for Windows operating system. So you're not that kind of programmer, but you should be able to, hey, there's a library that does this for me, and all I want to, understand is, if the switch sees this MAC address or this IP, do this for me. Or when I get an alert, SSH to that the device and do this. So
a lot of scripting,
a lot of scripting,
taking advantages of APIs.
And then you can grow from that. Because number one, if you are in the networking, it will be simplifying your daily work
Right.
to
Automation.
and then you can also extend to building your own solution sets, not only adding value to your customers, but also extending your portfolio and what you can do for the customers in terms of the simplicity. So I would really encourage anybody to just pick up a very easy language. There are a couple of easy to understand, which is like human readable, so you can, even if you don't understand the programming language, you can read to them and you can kind of figure out what they do.
Like one example, please.
Like Python would be one. You can read and understand what it does. Interestingly enough, even the big companies like Apple, they now their modern language is called Swift. And make something quick, and you can do monster stuff with it, but you can read it.
Right.
So there are certain programming rules and techniques that you will have to understand, but it's not intimidating.
So it sounds to me what you're saying is that a good advice to especially somebody new to networking or Wi-Fi might be to pick up some basic programming skills as well.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't have those. It's something that's always intrigued me, but I'm kind of an old guy.
Right.
But I will say this, I'm seeing more and more people in the industry that have dual skill sets like this.
And here's the trick. You can, if you're new to the industry, is very beneficial to do both of the time. Because you have like programming libraries for networking on Python. There's one really famous. It's called Scapy. And it can do a lot of things. So by learning the language and learning to use the library and program, you also learn
about networking. Right.
So I take this is happening, this is what I want to do. And by doing both, you're actually learning programming on something that is directly applicable to your work, and it just fits and ties it back together.
So we've been talking a lot about educating yourself and moving into these various fields. One thing I'd like to say to kind of summarize all this is, think about a doctor. They go to medical school. And when a doctor goes to medical school, they just don't walk out with that degree and go, okay, I'm a doctor and I never have to learn anything ever again. Okay? They then have to intern for a couple of years at a hospital.
Right.
And then they have to do continuing education because the medical field is always advancing at a pace that is like through the roof. So if they're still trying to live on just about what they learned in medical school, they're not going to survive. So it's the same thing in just really about any industry, but especially true in our industry because of the rapid pace of innovation. You have to stay on top of things, and you always have to learn something new. So one of the things I've enjoyed about being a trainer over all these years is I learn stuff from other people and students, and working in this field is you get to work with people that are smarter than you. So it's continued. In your adulthood, it's continued education, and you can never stop training yourself.
I agree. So the latest example is in our industry. When I started working for Aerohive, yes, there was this thing called cloud, and we had a cloud offering. But my networking mindset was always, it's just services on the public end, right? So it's just a server.
Just some big server over in like Washington, D.C. or something, right?
Yes, a public IP, I can access it, and yes, so
well, there's a lot more to it.
There's a lot more to it.
And I don't pretend to be an expert on cloud, but just working with some of our DevOps team and getting educated about them, I'm like, wow, those are all the components about a true elastic cloud. There's a lot to learn, and that's a whole field that you can go into. There's certifications on for like Amazon Cloud and Google Cloud if you want to learn that technology.
And to be honest, you don't have to be a technical expert in them, because that's its own field. But
having an understanding of it, and it's helped me working for we work for a company that is a cloud-based management company, and it's been challenging. We've had to learn about what cloud technology really is, and most people's, to your point, most people's conception of that is completely different from what it really is, because it is quite complex. So,
So there it is. Right? Entry is easy. Entry point is easy. There's a lot of information. Hands-on is easy. There's a lot of resources that you can get, but most of all, you'll just have to spend your time on it. But it's accessible. It's accessible.
Get the hands on, educate yourself, get out mentors, research. I mean, there's so much stuff for free on the internet, and there's lots of work available. If you can make, if you get the skill sets, you won't have trouble finding work.
That's a great point. And some people are concerned because everything has its peaks and its downs, and now we have a lot of like a big monster of a technology coming in with 5G. Mm-hmm. With all of the LTE in unlicensed space and everything, and don't worry about it. If you learn, whatever worse happens, you'll just transition to something else and take this over.
I've been fired or laid off 3 times in different careers, and each time I always ended up making more money and learning more after that. So it's always a blessing.
It's a journey. Right?
Yeah.
So, and if you're used to taking a journey, you'll be fine.
Right.
But by the way, we don't see a demise of Wi-Fi coming.
No, Wi-Fi is. I'll be dead, and Wi-Fi will still be around. So that's going to be on my tombstone.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed this one, David.
Okay, you too.
Yeah.
All right, that was long.
Thank you for watching.